Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of the PI Filmmaker podcast. Now, this week I'm going to talk about guerrilla filmmaking because yesterday I didn't really know what this week's episode was going to be about, but yesterday I went out for a coffee with my mum and I saw a group of filmmakers and they were shooting this production, and I saw the equipment out. There was kind of reflectors, some light stands, there was some actors who they were working with, and we decided to sit at this coffee shop where we've been to before, and as the action was happening right in front of us, we sat and watched it, and it was interesting to me to watch other filmmakers work and see how they do things, because everyone's going to have a different style and a different approach to filmmaking. I got the impression, now I could be wrong, that they were doing this guerrilla style, that they didn't really have permission to do this, and so it got me thinking about some of my experiences that I've had in terms of guerrilla filmmaking. I thought, that's kind of an interesting topic to discuss, and I actually I reached out to the filmmaker. I basically, I didn't go up to him on the day yesterday. I looked at the clapperboard that they were using to see who was directing, who was the cinematographer, and it turns out actually one of my old colleagues from education actually taught one of these filmmakers. It's like such a small world. But anyway, so I actually messaged the filmmaker. I found their name and I messaged them and said, do you want to go on the podcast? Now, they've not seen the message yet, or maybe they've just decided to ignore me. I don't know. But I thought, okay, well, I can still discuss guerrilla filmmaking this week. I won't say who the filmmaker was. I can still discuss guerrilla filmmaking this week, and maybe next week or at some point in the future they might come on the podcast and discuss their approach to guerrilla filmmaking, because it got me thinking. I was watching what they were doing, and I'm not saying it was wrong at all, but there was like a lot of gear and there was a lot of people stood around, and I actually started wondering, like, if they don't have permission to do this, like, it's kind of like at odds with my ideas of guerrilla filmmaking. So like, people tuning in, like, and you're like, what the fuck is guerrilla filmmaking? For those who don't know, I'm going to use the studio binder definition, because I know student filmmakers love studio binder. When I've taught filmmaking, the amount of essays that I've read that just quote from studio binder, and clearly like allergic to books, it's like so much easier to just jump online and find a studio binder quote on filmmaking. But anyway, I'm kind of doing the same thing here, but that's not true actually. When I was 18, I actually had the Guerrilla Filmmaker's Handbook, which was essential reading for any filmmaker like in the early 2000s. But anyway, everything's online now. So what is guerrilla filmmaking? Guerrilla filmmaking is a shooting style that is done clandestinely with no film permits, limited props, and usually a bare minimum crew. This usually means shooting on location quickly before anyone else notices what's going on. Preparation beforehand is essential, as is maintaining a low profile. This means not having a big boom mic, light setup, or having too many crew members around when shooting. Why guerrilla? The term guerrilla, 1R, or guerrilla, 2Rs, is taken from the Spanish word for a style of warfare waged between small bands of non-professional soldiers and official government military. In filmmaking, you can see how this idea applies, because this filmmaking style is not as organised or legal as a normal movie shoot. While a guerrilla shoot can be organised in its own way, it's still very risky, which is why it's also nicknamed run and gun. So what are guerrilla filmmaking characteristics? Skeleton crews, not doing multiple takes, documentary or handheld look, shooting in real locations, brackets without a permit, less noticeable camera and audio equipment. So how do you shoot guerrilla style? While we do not endorse the shooting and production style of guerrilla filmmaking, we can provide you with guerrilla filmmaking tips that cover the do's and don'ts. Before going into all that, feel free to watch their video, blah, 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 blah. So guerrilla filmmaking is cheaper than most other kinds of filmmaking, since you can bypass film permits. So it says, do use minimal film crew, do shoot your scenes just once if you can. Okay, and then there's a long article, not a long article, but there's a few extra tips online on Studio Binder. So it's kind of like a thing that independent filmmakers have been doing for a long time, and it involves working with what you find, like not against it, kind of accepting what you find. It's kind of that creative problem solving, like, okay, this is what we've got, how we're going to work around these issues, whether it be light or the people passing by in the background. As it says in the Studio Binder article, while we do not endorse the shooting and production of style of guerrilla filmmaking, it was really interesting for me when I've taught filmmaking, because I do use guerrilla tactics. There's a famous, well, not famous, but in Herzog's book he says guerrilla tactics are best, and he actually says ask for forgiveness, not permission, which has always kind of stuck with me in terms of going into a space and shooting. But it's kind of interesting because, like, what I saw yesterday was the kind of opposite of what I would expect with guerrilla filmmaking. Like, there was like a first AD, there was a producer, there was like, they'd put up lights, they had like Steadicam, and they had the big boom, which it says don't do. And I was kind of thinking, like, this isn't like kind of operating in a inconspicuous way. Like, if someone came up to them and said, like, what are you doing, like, maybe they had permission, I don't know. But then I was like, it was just kind of, I was asking all these questions to myself, like, about guerrilla filmmaking and what's the best approach if you don't have permission to be in a space. But obviously you want your film to look as good as it possibly can be. But when I think of guerrilla, like, there is that handheld approach. But I think what filmmakers are doing now, and like what I was saying about working, I'm all over the place this morning. I've not even finished my second coffee. When I've taught in the past, like, I want to talk about guerrilla filmmaking and talk to students about it, but there's very much this approach of, well, you need a permit or you can't do it. You need this or you can't do it. And it's like, yeah, that's right, but you're telling filmmakers that they're never going to make films outside of university unless they get into like kind of the BBC or ITV, because to put all those things in place, like, it costs a huge amount of money. Whereas, like, if you take an iPhone or, like, I don't know, GoPro or one of them DJIs, and you can be shooting on the streets, but if you do it inconspicuously, or that's how I've always done it. And I think what's happening in recent years is the technology is so accessible that now everyone's like, I want to do, well, not everyone, but I've seen that people want to do guerrilla, but they want it to also look like a Hollywood movie. So they're pulling out all the equipment and they're not really working with what's available. They're showing up and they're not working in skeleton crews. I was in Manchester once with a friend and we were sat in the Spoons near the town hall, and I saw this group of filmmakers doing some guerrilla filmmaking, and it was at night, and they were holding out these big lights, and I just thought, that's kind of like the exact opposite of what I think of when I think of guerrilla filmmaking, like that low budget indie filmmaking. So it is like kind of a way of avoiding the expensive permissions. You kind of have a level of authenticity because you're working with real environments and you're having to respond to them environments. And, like, also there is a level of creativity that goes along with that, because you are responding to what's in front of you. And there's some indie films that have kind of used this guerrilla approach that I've always loved. Like, in the early days of, not the early days, but in the 90s, you had like Robert Rodriguez was doing that on El Mariachi, which I've spoken about previously. Sean Baker, who's now gone on to huge success, he was using an iPhone and doing guerrilla filmmaking for like Tangerine. But before that, there was a film he did called Takeout that he shot on mini DV all around Manhattan, just guerrilla style. And it's about this guy who he's like a delivery guy, and it seems more appropriate now than probably then, because with all these like Uber cyclists and DoorDash type people, is that the name, DoorDash? These people doing delivery cycling. I saw it again in January with a Q&A by Sean Baker and the co-director, and yeah, it seemed really contemporary. But that level of authenticity you get from guerrilla filmmaking, like, you see scenes where they're in the takeout, in the takeaway, and they have real people interacting with the people in in the takeaway. So we see people really ordering food, and you get such natural interactions. Christopher Nolan, his not one of his first films, but his first feature, he did that occasionally with these guerrilla tactics, going into spaces and using what he had available. So he talks about it basically, the film's called Following, and I've got it on, where is it? 101 Films, and on the 101 Films edition, Blu-ray edition of that film, Nolan talks about the fact that they did some scenes in Covent Garden, a space that I also shot in a guerrilla fashion. But Nolan had go into that space, and he said, like, if we can't fit what we've got in terms of equipment into a taxi, we can't take it. Meanwhile, I've worked with students, and I've seen them filling up their mini or tiny car with like 300 pieces of equipment. And it's weird, isn't it? Because to me, like, even when indie films do all these things, they still don't look as slick and polished as Hollywood films. Because how can they? Because they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on these films. So it's like you're going for the veneer of like professional or high budget filmmaking, but it never quite looks like high budget filmmaking to me anyway. But yeah, like Sean Baker has done it, like Christopher Nolan. So he was going into Covent Garden and just taking what he had available. There was another film that got a lot of attention a number of years ago called Escape from Tomorrow, and what this guy did was, I mean, the film's kind of, he went into Disney World in Florida, and he shot this film, like a feature film, guerrilla style. So what he did for months was he scoped out various spaces, and he was constantly going into the theme park. I guess he had one of them year-long passes or whatever, and he was checking the light in various spaces, where the light would fall at certain times of the day. And then when they decided to shoot it, it was a case of the actors just had to be in that space, so they'd be mic'd up like for the full day with like lapels that like running, I mean, all with wires, not wireless like now. So they were on lapels, and apparently like syncing up the sound with the footage was just a nightmare, because you've got hours of sound and then less video footage. So they went in with like DSLRs, so it looked like someone was just filming their family holiday, and they pulled it off. And they even managed to get it released because they said it was a parody, which legally comes under fair use. So they got to show the Disney park, and they got away with it and got to release it because it fell under fair use. Because they were parodying the park, is what they were saying, that it was meant to be this happy place, and actually it turns nightmarish for this guy. But they shot it in they put it into black and white because that way they wouldn't have to be mindful of color temperatures changing between shots. And it's like it's just really interesting to watch as kind of an experiment. And I lost my train of thought. Another one, so Herzog. So I started on Herzog, and he did a film a few years ago called Family Romance LLC, and apparently he paid for that with his money from The Mandalorian. So he played a character in the Star Wars Mandalorian show, and he apparently took that money and then made this real low budget kind of guerrilla film out in Japan. And the film's about this guy who runs a service whereby you can rent him out to be a friend or like a father, or basically fulfill whatever role you want him to do or their workers to do in a public space or whatever. So he was out in these various locations shooting guerrilla style with a little camera. Again, he lapelled up the actor. The actor was the guy who really did this in real life. So Herzog's blending documentary and fiction, almost a bit like what I did with Blurred Lines, which I'll get onto in a little bit. But it's interesting with like the Blurred Lines reviews, all the criticism that the students targeted at the film. It's like they've never really, I get the impression they've never really watched films like this, so like they're criticizing something that they wouldn't watch anyway. And they probably say Family Romance LLC is dog shit, whereas to me, I thought it was one of the best films of maybe the last 10 years. I think what it said about the world in which we're living, in which even relationships are a commodity, and you can pay someone to do anything, which is becoming even more prevalent in the age of AI, that you can sit and have a conversation with a computer. And it kind of ends on a really interesting moment, that film. I won't spoil it because I would encourage people to go and watch it, but Herzog spoke about the fact that loads of scenes, they were just in spaces, and yeah, the camera works shaky, but it's like that's what you accept with this kind of guerrilla filmmaking process. Like going right back to John Cassavetes, like, who was on Manhattan streets shooting in the 50s with things like shadows, or in the 60s in his own house, like just moving quickly and picking up the footage. And it's kind of like that style of filmmaking's been abandoned now. It's like, oh well, you can get a Steadicam, or you can get I've got one of them, like we used it for a section in Notion, but it's like an electronic device, and you put the camera on top of it and it takes out all the shake. But I don't know, like there's a level of authenticity with shaky camera. It feels like you're watching something that's really happening. Like if I was filming something on my phone, there'd be an element of shake in the image. And Herzog, what he did was, there was this train station platform, and he wanted to shoot on the platform, but filmmaking was forbidden. So he was like, we're going in. I think they gave themselves 3 minutes to get the entire scene. And then suddenly Herzog, out the side of his eye, he saw the guards come in, and they put the camera away, and they just walked. He said he walked with complete conviction right past the guards, and they were like, what's going on? They didn't realize that the filmmaker had already gone past them, and he had the footage. Now, like, as Studio Binder says, like, people wouldn't encourage this type of filmmaking, and yet it's a way of getting things that you wouldn't ordinarily have access to because of budget. So yeah, Family Romance LLC, I'd thoroughly recommend that. So my experiences, I guess there's an ethical line here, like when you think of like Herzog, like what is the line? If ask for forgiveness, not permission. It's tricky, isn't it? Because now you've got, and like I heard that like Gen Z, like they don't drink or anything, and part of it is because they're scared people are going to film them and stick it online. People are filming all sorts of things just on the street, and you can end up in someone's video just by walking past in the background. Like all these people now are doing night out videos where they just film fights on the street, and people just sat talking to camera, slurring the words, and then that's online forever. So I think that line is becoming more and more blurred between like, well, what's the harm in a bit of indie filmmaking on the street where no one's doing any real harm, as long as you're working safely and you're not putting anyone in danger. So like with X, my first feature film, and I did it for loads of short films like around Manchester. Like I've probably shot every street in Manchester in a guerrilla fashion. At one, maybe not every street, I over exaggerate, but loads of sections of the city centre I've shot in a guerrilla fashion where I've just gone with an actor and we've got the moments and moved on. Like on X, like I had two actors in London, and we shot on the South Bank. We shot at Covent Garden, as I noted earlier. I shot at Abbey Road, like 4 or 5 in the morning. I even shot in a museum, and I'm not going to say which museum, because some museums, like one museum, like you've got to put the camera away, but another one, I just walked through, followed the actors, and they were doing their dialogue, and we just kind of did it. It's kind of crazy, really. And like, what the good thing for me is, like, I've talked to students a lot about, is this ability to then blend locations. So in X, for instance, the main character works at a photography studio, and we found this photography studio outside the city centre, maybe 4 or 5 miles outside the city centre. So the entrance didn't look very good. Well, not that it didn't look very good, but it doesn't look like someone works in the city centre. So what I did was, I had the actor walking through this busy city centre section of the northern quarter in Manchester. I just had him walk up a set of steps as if his office was in that space, cut, and then we're inside the photography studio that's miles away, and you can do creative things like that. So I do think there's some benefits to guerrilla filmmaking. So in X, like besides the things in London which were really difficult to acquire, like we even shot on Tower Bridge, and you've got all members of the public, so you're thinking through, okay, how do I shoot this in a way that it doesn't look like I've had no permission? Because what you want is people to be immersed in the story, or at least I do. And I've seen so many big budget Hollywood films where you see members of the public just staring down the lens because like, what's going on here? And like Birdman, the Michael Keaton film, what they did in that film, he has to go through Times Square in just like his boxer shorts. So the filmmakers actually hired a marching band to be playing in the middle of Times Square. So everyone, well, not everyone, but people would predominantly be looking at that and not notice the fact that a film crew was about to run past them with a camera, Michael Keaton. And then one or two people noticed, but it was so quick that they were like, what the fuck? And then they'd gone. So there's creative ways of getting around that, like the general public. But there is an element of that when you're in these spaces, like on the South Bank or Covent Garden. How do I shoot this in a way where the audience aren't going to be thinking, oh, why is that person staring in the camera? And what I've always done is I've thought of, how do I shoot this, like on a wide, on a close-up? What cutaways do I need that I can then use to disguise the fact that, okay, we were in that space, but we didn't actually have permission all the time. In Covent Garden, for instance, on X, we shot the scene one weekend, and we went at about 1 o'clock, which was stupid as fuck, to be honest. And the two characters are sat by like pillars, like a couple of columns, pillars, and someone sat right on the shoulder of, not on literally on the shoulder, but they sat on the column, and it looked like they were sat on the actor's shoulder, and it just looked awful. And there was like a school trip. So the week after, we went again, and we went at about 10 in the morning when it was just really quiet, and you just had that natural people milling about, walking by in the background. And it's cool in that regard because you get in those extras for free, like people just milling about, going about their day. And we got the scene, and I did a similar approach in on the South Bank sequence. So what you're doing is you're shooting in such a way that if someone passes the background in one shot, if you get another angle that's kind of directed at an actor's face, for instance, but you see the legs or the midriff of someone passing by, you can use that moment of the wide shot and make it look like the same person walked by in the close-up, just because you've got another human body quickly moving past the camera. So there's little tricks you can do like that to make it like, okay, they were in that space, the filmmakers, and they had the time to get this done properly. We shot on this the bridge in Manchester that links to Piccadilly train station. There's like it's the final shot in the film, basically. So partway through the film, the man and Andrea's character, Marie, they meet on this bridge, and then the film ends on the bridge as well. And on the day, I didn't realize someone actually owns this bridge. Like one of the buildings alongside that bridge owns it, and a security guard came out. I was like, what's happening? And then Andrea just kind of said, oh, we're just shooting this like little thing because I'm on a holiday in Manchester, and because it was just me with a camera, and we were working like really kind of like really low budget, just me, a camera, and two actors. They were like, yeah, that's fine. They just kind of like, yeah, go for it. Whereas if I'd have had a boom out and all the lights, they'd have probably been like, what the fuck are you lot doing? Get off our bridge. So yeah, we got the shots, and I even went on trains on X. Like we shot guerrilla style on trains, full dialogue scenes, and that was really cool because what I did with that is I booked 4 seats. The 4 seats where you've got the table, I booked all 4, even though there's 3 of us, and that allowed me to do shot reverse shot, so I could shoot one actor then the other actor, and also their seats were shown on the thing as taken, and we just put bags on the other seat that wasn't being used, and we're like, oh, our friend's gone to the toilet. Managed to get full sequence on a train, so that was fun as well. But one of the funny ones on X was, so there's a scene in a taxi in like a black cab, and there's one actor, and they're in the taxi with Andrea's character Marie, and they need to have an argument on the backseat of a taxi. So I phoned a taxi after we'd shot all these other scenes, and I said to the actor, right, we're going to go in a taxi now and do this. And they're like, are they going to know? And I was like, no, they're not going to know. And he was like, you're kidding? I was like, no. And it's like, we've got from Oxford Road, people from Manchester might not, outside of Manchester won't know what this means, but we've got from Oxford Road to the bottom end of Deansgate, the Wetherspoons at the bottom end of Deansgate. So it gave us about 15 minutes there and back because of traffic and things like that. was like, we're going to do it and we're just going to go for it. The first time he did it, like, he nailed it, but he said the minute after the take, because he's got to call her a fucking cunt, pardon my French, and she's got to look shocked and like heartbroken. And the taxi driver the actor said the taxi driver looked in the rearview mirror, but when he noticed the camera was out, he was like, oh, okay. And because he kept saying it, the taxi driver realised we're just shooting a film. We got to the Weatherspoons and he's like, you getting out here then? I was like, no, can you just take us back? He took us back to the hotel we were working from, or the Airbnb we were working from. Got this full dialogue scene in which there's this little argument. And the actors nailed it. I guess like the fact that there was this pressure of like, right, you've got there and back. But I guess like if I was in a taxi and I was pulling out lights and like a boom and all these other things, he might have been like, you lot are taking the piss. But because it was just me, a DSLR, and two actors, he was kind of like, yeah, whatever. So it is about that ability to travel light and adapt quickly to what it is that you have. And the back, like pretty much all of X, minus certain locations, was shot guerrilla, like all the stuff around London. And there was a moment like the first weekend in London where I really thought, I can't do this. Like, this is really difficult. The sheer amount of tourists in the middle of July and August when we were shooting, this is near impossible. But I kind of pulled myself together and we got the footage that we were required. And so when it came to doing Blurred Lines in 2022, there was like sections of that, and because the film, as I've discussed previously, was written in this real kind of, it was written really quickly, and I was thinking, okay, what do I have access to in the next couple of weeks that I can utilize, that I can shoot in a guerrilla fashion? And obviously I had these concert tickets, and someone watched Blurred Lines recently, this filmmaker, and they messaged me and like, did you have permission to go in those concerts and shoot? And I was like, no, we just did it all guerrilla, and it was tickets that I already had to various gigs. So there was a Kings of Leon concert in at the AO Arena. I could still think of it as the Manchester Arena, or not the Manchester Arena, the MEN basically, Manchester Evening News Arena, or earlier than that the 9X, but it's now the AO Arena, or I think it is, whatever. It's an arena in the city centre. And we were at this gig, and I thought, okay, well, how can the film build to this in some way, and how can we shoot in that space? And I just shot those scenes on a phone. So there's these sequences at this concert at the Manchester Arena, where Miranda's talking to the camera, and I'm in a scene as well, because again, it's thinking about, okay, I haven't got a ticket for another actor, so I'm going to have to just play that role and be part of this film. And you start bringing elements of real life into it. And we shot at a Haim concert as well, that was shot at, we did at Victoria Warehouse. And then it's thinking, okay, so if this is phone footage, how do we link that to part of the narrative? So what I came up with was this flashback concept whereby Miranda's looking at her phone and then recalls the memories of that evening as she's watching videos from that night, and then we kind of go into the videos in not a realistic way because you've got actors talking to camera, but it's like you prepping the mind of the audience to accept that change in visual style that we're now in phone footage because Miranda's been looking at her phone, and the film built towards this climax in which there was a 1940s festival down in the Midlands, in Tattershall. It really incredible festival. So 1940s weekend, and there was old school army tanks, and the old school bombers were flying over, like the old school 1940s airplanes. People are all dressed up in fancy dress, and I wouldn't have been at that event had I been shooting Notion, but because Notion was cancelled, it meant that, like Miranda in the film, I could spend some time with family, which wouldn't have happened. So the narrative kind of was influenced by my own experiences of, okay, if I was shooting a film, I would be missing these moments with family, like, which are precious. So the story became about a character understanding that actually there's some things more important than filmmaking, but then the contradiction to that is that I still made a film out of that experience. But we were at the 1940s festival, and everything in that is guerrilla fashion. So it's kind of, it becomes almost like a documentary highlighting the festival in which Miranda's spending time with her family in the film. And just having those, I can hear a bin. Can you hear that? It's bin day again. So you're getting these genuine emotions and a genuine atmosphere that can only be captured once. Like you see Miranda and her family taking selfies in front of 1940s cars and things like that, and you're just capturing it in this run and gun fashion. And it's a skeleton crew. You've got me, you've got a handheld look, you're shooting in real locations, and you're hopefully not being noticed by the people who are there. They just think you're making, like, I don't know, a whole movie, like the people who went into Disney and shot a film. And I've obviously carried this over to Notion. Like Notion, sorry, I'm just going to have a bit of coffee. Notion has, I've used this guerrilla tactics again for Notion. So we've got scenes that are shot by canals. Early on, there's a scene of Penny, Caitlin in a coffee shop, and I had her go in the coffee shop. I pointed the table that I wanted to work from, and I was outside shooting through the window at Penny as she had a coffee and kind of watched the world go by. And I love the creativity of that, like responding to real environments. And I know that at one point Caitlin lifted up a coffee and said it's empty, and I was like, you're gonna have to just act it. Like, you're just gonna have to pretend there's still a drink in there. I'm not buying another one of these expensive cappuccinos. And we got this location, like you've got a real space and you're just shooting through the window at the actor. And I love that moment in the film. Obviously it's not released yet, but working in that guerrilla fashion, and obviously, well, not obviously, but in the moment, Penny, Caitlin, notices something across the street. Now, this is again thinking about how to be mindful of scheduling these things. We didn't have that thing that she was looking at, that person at that point in time. But I came back at a later date because it was just a brief moment. We had the person then, and then you just insert that shot. So you've got Penny looking at something that would be shot weeks later. And when we came to do that shot, again, we shot through the window, but this time I needed to be inside the coffee to get the window reflections. I just went in, pulled out the camera, sat at a table, had a coffee, shot out the window, and they were like, they weren't bothered because you've just got a tiny camera, and they were like, oh, are you shooting something? I was like, oh yeah, I'm just shooting outside the city. And we just had the person opposite the road stand where they needed to be. Between the shots, you've got a scene that takes place weeks apart, but you've got two actors having this interaction. And I just love the creativity of that, what you can do through shots and cuts in terms of cinema, but it requires thinking out what it is that you need. And this is where sometimes, like, student directors, they don't have that overarching idea of what it is they're trying to do. Like, for me, like, mastering filmmaking is like, and I'm not saying I'm a master, but like Del Toro says, having that vision of, okay, I understand how this is going to go with this. Understanding where Penny's eyeline needed to be to hit the person that was going to be stood opposite the road. When I'm going back to that space, how do I need to frame this so it will look like Penny's perspective? And you're constantly thinking through those problems and thinking, okay, how do we do this? It was really funny, actually, on Notion, one of the actors, because I kept saying guerrilla style, they thought it was guerrilla like the animal. And they jokingly started calling it giraffe filmmaking because, like, I don't know, gorilla, giraffe, like they just thought it was funny, and that made me laugh. A bit of giraffe filmmaking, but no, it is guerrilla filmmaking, and I've had a really good time thinking through those problems over the years. But it was interesting yesterday seeing people doing guerrilla filmmaking, but trying to approach it with a larger budget. It's not how I do it. And I hope the person gets back to me and comes on to discuss it. And like, what is it about? I think it making something look more expensive. It's that you're protecting yourself, really, aren't you, from accusations that you've made a cheap movie? Because if it looks slick, people can't really attack it for that. One of the things with Blurred Lines, like the students attacking it, like, oh, it looks cheap. It's like, it is cheap, but it's interesting with film like that. Prestige is applied to something that costs more. It's like, well, I've watched a lot of films that cost a lot and they're shit. Like them Transformers films by Michael Bay, they are crap. like films like that, I just don't get the point of like who are they for? Like, what are they doing? There's a great quote, and I stuck it in X actually when it comes to Transformers. Michael Bay said, I think it was Transformers 2. He said, "May I suggest that those who think Transformers is a great or even good movie are not sufficiently evolved." I think it was evolved. It's like I'm on a complete tangent here, but yeah, with all my features now, I've applied this guerrilla approach, but I've always done it in a way that's kind of working out the problems so that I'm not getting in the way of people, and I'm not like going to work in a way that people are distracted by what I'm doing, or I'm not getting in the way of the public. I mean, people always come up to you when you're doing these things, like, what you doing, what you doing. Like, I remember on X, I was shooting this scene, and some pissed up people in Manchester, he literally walked into me on purpose, like, and knocked me, and then started laughing. I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, I don't know what goes on with those type of people. Like, is it because they're doing nothing with themselves and they've just got nothing better to do than get pissed? It's like, if your interest is getting pissed, go and get pissed. Why are you literally walking into someone that you don't know? But anyway, so to me, like, guerrilla filmmaking is that traveling light and things like that. And what I noticed yesterday when I was watching those people, at one point they were like saying to members of the public, "Oh, you can't sit there because one of our actors is going to be sat there." It's like, yeah, but you kind of don't own this space. And like, they were operating in a way like they had a first AD and like someone like holding up reflectors, and I was like, this is not what I think of when I think of guerrilla filmmaking. But it's interesting, and I'd love for that person to come on and discuss indie filmmaking and their approach to guerrilla filmmaking and why it is that they want that polished aesthetic. I mean, I know what it is, because if people say that's slick, you can't really critique it on that front. And I think indie filmmaking now, more and more people are not willing to accept that lo-fi aesthetic because they're so used to these slick Hollywood productions. But like, when you watch like these big films, like on like The Dark Knight Rises, for instance, they're shooting on the streets in, I think they're in New York, but they've got huge sheets between buildings blocking out the sunlight, so that then they can light it properly. Like yesterday, like, they've got these lights out and these reflectors, and then they're waiting for the sun. It's like, you've kind of got to accept that the sun is going to come and go, and you've kind of got to work around that. So what I did with X, like, I was on the South Bank, I couldn't just keep waiting for the sun to disappear. So we have shots where the sun comes out and then it goes dark again. What I did was I shot this scene. I got a quick insert shot of the sunlight dipping through the branches that are above Terry and Andrea. The sunlight's coming in and out, in and out, in and out. And I used that at the start of the scene, and it just orientates the viewer that, okay, they're in a space where the sunlight is coming out and then dipping in again. So like, it's going bright, dark, bright, dark. So then when they see the shots of Andrea and Terry going bright and dark, the audience going, oh, okay, it's because they're under this tree and the sun's coming at them, and then it's disappearing behind the branches. So I think you've got to think more like that than thinking, okay, we're going to shoot this as if we're Christopher Nolan and we're going to wait for the sun to disappear so we can get it exactly right. And if we are in a space, we can't really say to the general public, oh, you can't sit there because one of our actors is going to be there. I think it's about thinking through, okay, these are my limitations, like with Blurred Lines, for instance. These are my limitations in the Manchester Arena. How do I shoot this and still get a sequence? So I knew, like with Blurred Lines, that scene of me and Miranda, I can't do a two-shot because who's going to film it? There's only me and Miranda in that space. So what I need to do is, I'm going to have to do this straight to camera and almost get the scene in a way that it's all in Miranda's head, and you put in the audience in the headspace of Miranda, which again you do through showing that she's looking at a phone and then recalling these events. And then you do get the two shot as you get two people dancing, and then you just have Miranda looking at that footage, and then it goes into this moment in which she recalls a conversation. And what I did was I shot one side and Miranda shot the other. And on the final scene, I just kind of used more of a 4:3 aspect ratio, so more square. Usually people use that now to suggest claustrophobia, but I used it to suggest that Miranda's headspace is coming directly into that thinking of just her and this person having this intimate conversation. So using that 4:3 aspect ratio for intimacy as opposed to claustrophobia, but thinking through, okay, that prevents members of the general public looking directly into the lens, and I can work around the issues of the people in the background coming and going and sitting down and so forth. So to me, guerrilla filmmaking is just thinking through all those kind of issues and that might arise by the public, and the public being there and also having a lack of a permit and a lack of permission. So you've just got to think through what it is that you're doing. But I love that. I love working around those issues, thinking, okay, I can't block public spaces. I can't have a large crew. I can't be creating risks for people. I can't be working in a way that's going to potentially put anyone at risk. I can't be disrupting businesses and things like that. Yes, you want good sound, but that might be a case that, okay, at a later date, I might have to replace all the sound. So yesterday, for instance, after one take, my mum actually clapped. Then the sound person, I saw them, was shaking their head like, oh, you've just ruined that take. But it's like, there's a certain element of like, you're in a space, there's loads of people. You might have to actually replace some of that sound. So I think, to me, guerrilla filmmaking is about accepting limitations and working with it, rather than thinking we're going to work as if we've got a Christopher Nolan style project where everything can be shut down and everyone sat around watching can be real extras. And this is obviously why soaps like Corrie shoot on their own sets and they've got their own street built, because they don't want to work with the issues that arise when you're just out in the real world shooting, because it's difficult. So to me, just like if we're thinking about the advantages of this, obviously you've got the authenticity of locations, you can get natural performances, you can work quickly, you can lower costs. It gives you that ability to be creative and adapt to the real world. But to me, it's about being polite and being mindful of public spaces and who's around, having insurance, obviously, because you don't want people doing things and then there being any accident that possibly happens or any issues that arise. And safety's always got to come first. And the disadvantage is, obviously, you have got a lack of control that you've got to accept. You have got to accept the noise. You have got to accept weather changes. You've got to accept possible interruptions, possible continuity issues. But this is thinking through, okay, what footage do I need so that there are no continuity issues? So my advice, if I was doing guerrilla filmmaking, I'm not saying these people are doing it wrong, and I would love to have a chat with them about how they did it, because I think it's an interesting approach. But my practical advice would be, keep the production small, keep the crew small. If possible, scout locations beforehand. Obviously with Covent Garden on X, I had a rude awakening. Think about what shots you're going to need so that there aren't potential continuity issues later in the edit. Minimal equipment. Be mindful of those around you. Be flexible if things aren't working. Okay, how do we quickly adapt to get what it is that we do need? So don't be like locked in that, oh, that's the shot, and if it's not that, we've got to go home. Like, you might need to rethink it on the day. So to me, guerrilla filmmaking, it's not about breaking rules. I mean, you might be breaking some rules, like you might be doing things that legally you don't have a permit for, but it's about creative problem solving. Okay, this is the space, this is the situation, how do we work around that so we can get our scene and move forward? Independent filmmaking to me has always been about that resourceful thinking, creative problem solving, and potentially, like, if you do it well, like it's free production design, it's free extras, and it's a way of elevating your production. So you're out on South Bank, or you're in Covent Garden, or you're in a museum, or you're in a coffee shop, and you're getting all these locations for free, essentially. Because you have to be mindful if you don't have the budget. So like, how do I tell my story in an effective way without the budget that I would like? And the amount of like sort of happy accidents and images that have happened as a result of that, like, I'm eternally grateful for. I think filmmaking, when you have happy accidents, is just incredible. It feels like a miracle almost, like this thing happened and now I've got it captured forever. When I worked on this, I might have told this story, but when I worked on this feature a few years ago, this film called Cleft Lip, and we were shooting guerrilla style in this space in Ancoats, and it's like a bit of a hipstery area. And like the producer was like moaning about this taxi driver that was parked and saying, why are they running their engine? There were some people working out, doing like some urban gym thing, like where they were running and like doing step ups on like the bench and the steps that are there in this space in Ancoats. And they were kind of moaning like, oh, these people, why don't they understand that we're trying to make a film here? It's like, well, to be fair, like, why don't you understand we're shooting here without permission? The general public have a right to be here. We should be thinking, how do we work around that? Not that we're going to operate like we're Christopher Nolan or one of these big budget Hollywood filmmakers. Like, what would Herzog do? That's a quote I've long thought of. Like, Herzog has this moment at the start of Family Romance LLC where the main character meets this girl who's the mum of this little girl, this 10-year-old, I think she is. The mum has hired this guy to pretend to be her father because she doesn't know her father and she wants a relationship. So this guy's looking for who the girl might be, and Herzog just shoots it all guerrilla style with people just passing the camera. Yeah, the footage is shaky, but it's like a real lovely moment in which this guy connects with this, well, or presents himself as a father, and we see this moment. And if a scene's working emotionally, it goes back to what Murch is saying. If you've got the right emotion, like the same as what Murch said about his rule of 6 with editing, like if continuity can go out the window, if the emotion and rhythm and story are working, and that's my approach to guerrilla filmmaking, like camera work, overexposed images, slightly out of focused images, they can all work if the emotion's right. If that's working, then I can forgive the other stuff. But I think now, like, there is this approach with indie, like, no, you can't have the image less than perfection. And it's like, even to me, like, every micro budget shot I've watched, like 10,000, I always see the budget. It doesn't matter how slick it looks, the look they've added. I always sense that, yeah, they've not had loads of money for this because I know filmmaking. So I just think kind of just accept the limitations, and if people don't vibe with it, then this film isn't for them. Like, low budget film isn't for them. So there's some thoughts about guerrilla filmmaking. I don't know if I discussed everything that I had in my notes. I think I did, and I'll probably return to some of these stories at various points because to me, I love guerrilla filmmaking. I love going out into a space and getting a shot and moving on. And it's like you get those happy accidents, as all these great filmmakers have said. I know, like, recently I picked up the Sean Baker Criterion edition of a film he made called Prince of Broadway, which he did after Takeout. And to me, like, I really do love these early ones more than some of the later ones, in all honesty. Like, I think some of them early ones are better than films like Honora, for instance. But on Prince of Broadway, there's this argument scene where the main character has like this argument in the street, and Sean Baker, like he said, like on the mini DV camera that he was using, the take they had to use, the best take, was the most overexposed one. He said he could have used the properly exposed one where the light was better, but the performances weren't there. And I think, like, just having that mindfulness of, okay, what is important in this moment? Is it that the sky's exposed correctly, or is it that the performances are right? And Sean Baker said, no, it was that the performances were right. Like, I went with the take, even though the sky's blown out and it makes me cringe, the performances were there. And what was interesting when I did the Q&A with some students, the Q&A with Sean Baker for some student filmmakers, he was spilling the beans on Honora, and this was before Honora was even released. And he said they even did some guerrilla filmmaking on Honora. They went into a bar, real lo-fi, with the camera, and they just started shooting in this space. So it's good to see that, like, these top filmmakers still work in this way, and they still see the benefits of, okay, you get a level of authenticity that you might not get if you were closing down all the spaces. For instance, like Christopher Nolan on the following DVD, Blu-ray, there's an interview with him, and he talks about working in these real flats, these real apartments in London, and these various spaces. He says, what I got for free back then, I'm still now striving for with millions of dollars, because he says there's a grit to real spaces that you then have to spend millions on to get on a bigger budget production where you can shut a space down. So he says, like, it's interesting that like working with those limitations has its benefits, and there's an authenticity and realism that you get from working in a guerrilla fashion. So anyway, guerrilla filmmaking, there's some thoughts based on watching some filmmakers work yesterday. Again, I'm not saying they were working wrong, but to me, it's not how I would have approached guerrilla filmmaking, because to me they were drawing attention to themselves. And I'm really interested to see how this film will cut together, because obviously you've got a lot of people in the background. Is there going to be cutaways of those people, like watching this interaction between these people who are having a bit of an argument? Like, how are they going to work around that? I'm interested to see. So hopefully the filmmaker comes on at some point and is up for having a chat about this. But guerrilla filmmaking, that's Mark Duggan's episode 21. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll catch you again next week. So, little addition. I did a quick spot check on the sound for today's episode, and I noticed that, just clicking through to listen to various parts, I noticed that I said Michael Bay made a quote about Transformers. Michael Bay is actually the director of that film. I don't think he would say that the audience are not sufficiently evolved if they thought Transformers was a good film. No, Michael Bay wouldn't say that. And I noticed a couple of weeks ago, actually, I also called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Once Upon a Time in America. If these things happen, it's because I'm just kind of monologuing and I don't go back and edit. But on this occasion, I thought I would, because I attributed the quote about Transformers to Michael Bay instead of Roger Ebert. So Roger Ebert was a really great, respected American film critic, and I just went and found the article in which he made this quote. It's called, it's a 9-minute read, and it's called I'm a Proud Brainiac, in which he discusses people attacking him for his views on Transformers. So the article opens, Roger Ebert is a moron. Transformers 2 is the best action movie ever. Don't listen to that moron. He is only into slow, boring, romantic movies. That is his type of movies. Michael Bay did a great job. Roger, you're an old fart, John C. And that's kind of a joke comeback and a joke attack. But he discusses kind of people targeting him for having an opinion and an informed opinion. And it's kind of interesting in the age of Letterboxd that we've people, oh, it's not that deep. Kind of, I hate that comment online, oh, it's not that deep. It's like, if you want to approach things like on a very surface level, that's fine, but don't attack people who have an opinion higher than that and expectations higher than that. And it's kind of happening with Supergirl now, like people saying, oh no, it's just it is what it is, it is what it is. It's like, well, yeah, but it doesn't mean you have to think that that's good or that people don't deserve more from their films. So anyway, I'm getting on to the point. So Roger Ebert in his article says, so let's focus on those who seriously believe Transformers is one of this year's best films. Are these people wrong? Yes, they are wrong. I'm fond of the story I tell about Gene Siskel. When a so-called film critic defended a questionable review by saying, after all, it's opinion, Gene told him, there is a point when a personal opinion shades off into an error of fact. When you say The Valachi Papers is a better film than The Godfather, you are wrong. Quite true, says Ebert. We should respect differing opinions up to a certain point, and then it's time for the wise to blow the whistle. Sir, not only do I differ with what you say, but I would certainly not fight to the death for your right to say it, not me. You have to pick your fights. What I believe is that all clear-minded people should remain two things throughout their lifetimes, curious and teachable. If someone I respect tells me I must take a closer look at the films of Abbas Kiarostami, I will take that seriously. If someone says the Kung Fu movies of the 1970s, which I used for our old Dog of the Week segments, deserve serious consideration, I will listen. I will try to do what Pauline Kael said. She did. Take everything you are and all the films you've seen into the theatre. See the film and decide if anything's changed. The older you are and the more films you've seen, the more you take into the theatre. So, skip forward a little bit. He then goes on to say, those who think Transformers is a great or even good film are, may I tactfully suggest, not sufficiently evolved. Film by film, I hope they climb a personal ladder into the realm of better films until their standards improve. Those people contain multitudes. They deserve films that refresh the parts others do not reach. They don't need to spend a lifetime with the water with the water only up to their toes. Beautifully put, and I thoroughly recommend that article. Interesting as well, because it kind of ties into what I was saying about film festivals a few weeks ago. When you say no experience needed to judge the films, like I nearly did it again. I nearly said like Michael Bay said. Like Roger Ebert said, you take to a film everything that you are in every film that you've seen. So if you're saying to people who only engage in mainstream blockbusters, judge these films, then they might look at it and go, well, I don't know what this is. Like what I said with a film like Persona. Well, I don't understand this. What is this? So it's interesting. But anyway, my opinion, having watched a lot of films and a lot of good films, I'm with Ebert. Transformers is trash. And I don't really know what that has to do with guerrilla filmmaking, but there we are. So I just wanted to come back and add a little segment to this podcast. Go read Roger Ebert's article and have a think about what I've been talking about in this episode. And I'll catch you again next week.